accepted it. Like I just had to like let go of my my male pattern vanity and just go with the fact that I had to be completely in the dark, or I had this lamp that's gonna completely wash me out. Like if I had a COVID name for these interviews, it would be Casper. I mean, I completely.
Well, in most interviews, I have the reddest face. I mean, most Zoom calls I'm on, so it's good that you've got a little more color than I do. I like to.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It could be the lighting. I don't know. You should. I mean, who knows? The other day I was looking like a giant rosy cheek. All right. Okay, and we are live. Okay, we are joined this hour by Danny Alexander, who, among many other things, many hats over the years, an incredible music journalist. But he is the only person on earth that I am aware of. Now, I could be wrong, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, Danny, or an audience member, should they know. But I believe you are the only person in the history of the United States of America to have written a book both about Soul Asylum and Mary J. Blige. So why don't we start with the book you wrote about Soul Asylum?
All right. Well, I got an assignment. I got asked by my editor at Rock and Rap Confidential in 1995 if I wanted to do one of like 3 biographies. There's going to be this little series. It's these little things. I actually thought I'd get the props. There it is. Right? It's a little CD size, right? CD size. And I had 3 months to write something. And so I thought, well, Soul Asylum was top of the charts right then. And I couldn't think of a band that, although I didn't write about bands like that very much at that point, I couldn't think of a band that was more, that I got more in terms of where they came from in my own background. So I thought, and I love the guys. And so I wrote about them in that moment when they were at the top of the charts, and they fell as soon as I wrote a book. So
no, there's no one-to-one connection. I don't know. I want to get into like why you identify with them so much. I think for most people who do remember Soul Asylum, they remember Runaway Train, that being kind of the big hit. And I just felt like, like the Goo Goo Dolls killed their career. It was just like this de-evolution of the band. And in all fairness, Soul Asylum may have been a kind of borrowed heavily from the Replacements, and eventually we got the Goo Goo Dolls. But tell us about Soul Asylum and why it spoke so much to you.
Well, we were all we're all the same age, and when I came awake with music, it was the punk movement, right? Like in the late 70s. And I mean, I loved music already. I mean, Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, I think I wore that t-shirt for a year in 9th grade, but and I had a lot of stuff I was into, but punk suddenly like brought it down to my size. It felt like these were my guys, especially the Clash. Clash was my band. But and so there were all these bands that later broke through in the top 40 and became grunge, right? But those bands from the 80s, and they were all people. I felt like Soul Asylum, the first time I went and saw them, I felt like they're pretty much that's pretty much the kind of band I would be in if I was in a band, because I understood the influences, I understood where they were coming from. I wasn't necessarily, I had quit listening sort of exclusively to that kind of underground punkish rock at that point. So it was an interesting sort of like, I need to catch up and learn about my people a little bit here, because I recognized they were that, right? But I had gotten married at a young age. My tastes had gone in different directions, but I understood where they came from. I felt them, and I also understood how they were having a difficult time negotiating stardom, right? So much of the punk ethos was like, if you're popular, there must be something wrong with you. So there was kind of a self-hatred that was part of it too, but they wanted to be big and they wanted to make statements, and I felt like I knew them. So I had some choices. It was really an assignment, and I had 3 months start to finish to write that book, and it worked out well. It was a lot of fun. No one wanted to talk to me. They'd had some bad press from Rolling Stone, and nobody wanted to talk to me. So I like snuck into the Twin Tone Records where they had worked. There was a very nice woman that worked there that let me look through their archives and get a lot of good information. I knew a lot of people up in Minneapolis that helped too. Never could. I interviewed them actually surreptitiously for like a local paper because they were going to tour through town. And I didn't tell them I was working on a book because they'd already rejected me. I didn't want them to know I was that same guy. And but I got some good interviews out of that. And
did you change your name or did they just forget your name?
They just forgot.
No, I'm kind of curious.
Not being famous, yeah.
You know, you're one of these people that has two first names, right? So I was wondering if, like, you know, like you would, you know, write to them originally as Danny Alexander, then all of a sudden, like, you know, be like, "Hi, I'd like to interview for this paper. I'm Alexander Danny." You know, like, that's what I would do. I mean, that's how
I've never even thought to try that. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Never say I did nothing for you.
Yeah, you did a lot for me. I mean, this idea right here just blows my mind. What you're doing here, I think, is fantastic. It's like, now if I had ideas, as somebody who's done like hundreds of interviews in my life, I would have this idea. But you beat me to it. Good job. It's great.
I knew whoever stayed ahead of the curve was for the spoils, is what I understood almost immediately. I mean, I lost like $8,000 in like 24 hours of college contracts. And so I'm like, all right, what I need to do now is stay ahead of everyone else. And something will come of it. So that was kind of how this came. But this isn't about me, it's about you. It's about and not about even it's about Soul Asylum, because I think, again, most people who do Soul Asylum remember at this point of the interview, most people who do remember Soul Asylum remember this one hit, Runaway Train, which, again, you say they wanted to make statements, and Runaway Train is certainly a statement song. But what were the deeper politics of the band Soul Asylum?
A lot of it's aesthetic. It's like there was I like the fact that they were you could say, yes, as you said, the Replacements. They sounded like a mix of they sounded to me always like a mix of the Replacements and Husker Du, the two big Minneapolis bands that they most often worked with. And I think they always had the sort of stigma of being the little brothers or something, or the slightly second tier from those guys throughout the 80s. But I was impressed with how big they wanted to be. A lot of those post-punk bands were kind of they tended toward a lo-fi approach, and they tended toward being obscure, and they tended toward not necessarily wanting to reach a big audience. But Soul Asylum wanted a big audience, and Runaway Train's perfect evidence, right? I mean, that was one of those things like Rage Against the Machine's first album, where that album was out like a year, if I remember right, before that single was released with that video. And then when they put that video on of all the Runaways, and which they did for like good reasons, but that took it all over the place. They got constant play on MTV and all that. They had songs like Black Gold that dealt with really like the sort of forces that are specifically like, the petroleum industry and the interests of the imperialist interests around the globe and stuff. They dealt with those things on kind of a personal political level. And they also wrestled a lot with just, what music's for and what's it's about. And of course they were also kind of self-flagellating and tore themselves up a lot, confessionalist in a lot of ways, and some of that's good, some of that's bad, but I related to it. It's almost hard to figure out how I think they were conscious enough of being of their name, Soul Asylum. They're conscious of race, and they were conscious of I want to say class, because they did like this record P9 dealing with the Hormel strike and up in Austin, Minnesota. But they were certainly conscious of the fact that they were somewhat of a kind of a privileged position as one of these white Minneapolis underground bands, you know, and Dave Pirner in particular, I think, wrestled with these questions. And I'm not knocking anybody else, but he was so much the voice of the band. I mean, they did have three good songwriters, especially with Dan Murphy. They had a strong second songwriter. I always thought his song was like whatever he wrote, or whatever 2 songs he wrote on a record or something, were like, that's when you have a really solid band, when like the second songwriter writes as good a songs as the main one, you know. It's like, you know, that was really it. It was just, this was something happening at the moment on the main stage that reflected my own background, being turned on to music by punk because it was real human sized. That's as opposed to the big 70s rock star thing, which I loved some of those big rock stars. I mentioned but they weren't relatable in the same way that some of these renegades were, you know? It's oh, I lost your voice. Wonder why that is.
This will be viewed maybe now or later by a wide. This will be viewed by a wide cross section of people, either now or later. Who knows when? But eventually, because I don't stop. But it'll be viewed by people coming from a wide different backgrounds of interest and wherever. So can you tell our audience a little bit about these bands you mentioned, The Replacements and Husker Du?
Yeah, I love The Replacements. They were such, to me, they seemed like we started calling this stuff, punk was such a funny thing. Like, you know, once you were like the second punk band, you were your punkishness, your rebellion, your DIY nature was sort of called into question or something, right? It was a self destructive movement in a lot of ways, although it still goes strong in many ways too. But Replacements felt to me like, you know, they're a very melodic band. Paul Westerberg was the main songwriter there. They were also self-sabotaging. The one night I saw them down in Oklahoma City, they were so drunk that I don't really think they could play, although they turned out like 1 or 2 good performances that night. And they were famous for having a great night and then a terrible night. But they were so melodic, so beautiful. They had a song, 16 Blue, and various others that were so relatable in terms of like just teenage angst, you know. Husker Du was this phenomena that I never quite understood. It's kind of like the Goo Goo Dolls thing. I mean, they all had that I like Goo Goo Dolls is different, but they had this churning sort of, I almost think of them as circle songs or something, this churning sort of rhythmic thing that was going on. And what I thought were basically very romantic little songs, angry romantic songs, right? And but I just didn't identify as well as I did with Replacements. But Soul Asylum seemed to me like the perfect mix. Another thing that was interesting about Soul Asylum to me was seeing them. I don't mean to get off the other bands, but was to see the first time I saw them live is like, this band has 2 frontmen. I mean, it didn't have a frontman. I mean, later it became very clearly like Dave Pirner because he's like dating Winona Ryder and whatever. but back then it was like there's these 2 crazy, intense blonde guys at the front of the stage. They're sitting right next to each other. Dave's whipping his hair around all the time. They're very, very dynamic, kind of exciting to watch. Very exciting to watch. But they felt like a band rather than like a front man with some people behind him, you know? It was right. That was interesting to me too, because I don't think I've ever seen a band that felt more like a band than that, you know, at one time.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, I mean, like it's almost kind of breaking into like a conversation just about music in general and like some like lessons. But you know, I you know, when I was a teenager, I listened to this music from the past that I was told. Reading like Spin magazine or something like that, I was told like, you know, this is like if you're in the know, you got to know these bands, right? And Husker Du was one of them. But I don't know, like you know, band I really like was Perry Ubu. That kind of reminded me of like that kind of. I thought that was like a much better version of what I was told Husker Du was supposed to be.
What was it?
Perry Ubu.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're better, right?
They're a good band. Yeah, I don't know how to measure them next to each other.
All right. I'm not crazy. You heard it here,
I'm making
everyone.
so much trouble.
Music journalist. He puts his name. He puts his name on that. I'm just kidding. That was Alexander.
It's funny. Well, yeah, there's that. But in the middle '80s, I kind of like rediscovered what I loved when I was 10.
Mhm.
As pop radio, all I listened to was the top 40 on like AM when I was like 10, 11, 12, right? And Boogie Nights and all this great music that was like formative to me. Strawberry Letter 23, all these great things. And then Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life was like, my Bible or something. And then you go through, one of the things you realized was happening, and I understand it better now, but I didn't really then, was that how segregated things were getting.
Mm.
And how there was such a divide, I think a class divide between, what you felt like with the punks or the rock and rollers or whatever versus the rock stars, like the big people in the limos, it's like, and I, by 84, 83, 84, when all these musicians start, like, you suddenly had a pretty integrated top 40 again. You had all these people working together. Like, I had this like, you just think about the fact that in 84, you had like Tina Turner at 45 or whatever. She had a hit record, and you had Jay Giles on one hand, and you had Michael Jackson and Prince and all these things at the top of the charts. The top of the charts was interesting, right? And I began to feel very alienated from the punk thing. So I sensed some of that in Soul Asylum, I think, because actually at this moment in the middle 80s, when those things were taking off, I was feeling pretty distant from it, but I knew they were my kin.
Yeah. You think about the segregation of the country, but also of the music scene. I'm really interested in this because, again, you are. I jokingly said you're the only person to have written a book about both Soul Asylum and Mary J. Blige, but that is actually true. You wrote a book about Soul Asylum and Mary J. Blige, so it's kind of a unique position. Can you tell us what happened? How did you come to write a book about Mary J. Blige?
Well, that is that was something that was starting back there in the middle 80s, which was I got married in 84, right? I don't want to give too much backstory. But I got married in 84, and I'd been in a relationship with this woman since 79, and I started, and I would take her to punk shows and stuff, and the slam dancing and stuff. We'd end up at the back of the room because she was like 5'1", and there was a way this wasn't inclusive.
Wait, can I stop you there? Why did you think that was a good idea?
Because I always went to music. I was just always dragging her to stuff, And to my credit, her favorite concert maybe ever was the Clash at the Bronco Bowl, a bowling alley in Dallas, Texas, that we went to, and we got stranded by the road on that trip, but on the way back, fortunately. But I started listening to women, and I was at that moment in 87, 88 when Salt and Peppa and MC Light and Queen Latifah and all these things are happening with women, and people I remember, that MC Trouble and Ice Cream Tea and different people that aren't really remembered anymore. But there was all this stuff happening with women in hip hop, and that's what I started writing about almost more than anything else. I was always kind of I started writing about music real seriously in 88. And like all the time, and I would go through the promo bins here at the, the promo bins that I had access to at the local alternative press and all that. And no one would touch these women, these hip hop women and the R&B women, and lots of other things too. I wrote a lot about metal. I wrote a lot about a lot of different Spanish language music, always. Which was difficult because I don't speak Spanish, so that was a trick. I had to really focus on the music, but I would figure it out. Like, oh, okay, yeah, the subtleties of the lyrics, I'm sure I lost, but it really focused you on the music. But anyway, I was always listening to women. I was thinking I made a move there from, music when I was 15, 16 was like me. My Springsteen poster on my wall was like me. It was like he had pimples and stuff, and it looked like it was like a rock star that looked like me in some way. To starting to listen to people who weren't me, right? Yeah. And a lot of these women were calling out their men. Real early on, I started developing this. I was fascinated by this whole phenomena of sort of the Sunday morning kitchen song, the like you're getting the riot act from your wife on this song or from your girlfriend or whatever. And but it was like it's that stuff helped me process being married and made me think about where I was at that point in my life, right? Mm-hmm. So I started, there was a movement of women in hip hop and R&B that no one talks about. People talk about the Riot Girls and all kinds of things, but no one talks about what was happening there between like 1987, really with Control, Janet Jackson. From that moment till the mid 90s, there's this moment in Panther that the Black Panther movie. The Black Panther movie that I can't think of the name of the guy who made it, Mario. But anyway, what's that?
Dan Peebles.
Yes, yeah, right, exactly. Thank you. I'm getting old, man. And but there was a song, Freedom, written by a R&B singer named Joy, that they had like two versions of the song and two videos for that song. One was all these like 60 R&B singers, TLC, Salt-N-Pepa, SWV, all these. Well, no, Salt-N-Pepa was on the rap one, but they had like 60 women for the hip hop version and 60 women for the R&B version, and that there was never a point in the history later where that would have been possible. But that happened at that moment. They were like, you could sit at home, you could name each person in that video, and it really felt like an important movement. And Mary J. Blige was a part of that. She was actually one that I was a little slow to warm up to, because she was so like I kind of missed, which all that her fans would hate this, but I kind of What's the 411 didn't really grab me that much. It was so much. It's so not initially. I love it now, but because it was so much like she was. There were two things that gave her credibility. One was it was made out to be like Puff Daddy's thing, right? Which in some ways it was, but also I think there was this sense that she was a woman that like the hip hop guys would take seriously. Particularly after she made that record with Method Man. Was it Method Man?
You're All I Need.
Yeah, You're All I Need. Right. She was taken seriously, while these other women I was right. I mean, I love TLC, right? Stuff like that, right? Those women weren't being taken seriously, not in the same way.
Yeah.
And she survived, and I thought in many ways she made some of her best music in her, second decade. So when I had the chance, I got offered a chance to write a proposal about a great American artist. I was thinking about different people. I was thinking I really want to write about one of these women. I mean, Salt-N-Pepa crossed my mind. You're back there. Got Black's Magic back there behind me. Salt-N-Pepa crossed my mind. But it was really Mary who had this like 25-year career, and there wasn't any fluff in it. It was a great. I still think she has this substantial career that just doesn't get ignored by her fans, but it's almost like it's not happening outside of that, But her fans are the most, her fans are like Metallica fans. They're like the most exciting fans in the world. They're there for that show, So anyway, I really thought she was the one to sort of hang all of that writing I've been doing all those years on, and to try to talk about women in music and Black women in music, but really just the thing of And she also brought a class thing to it too. Like, Beyonce may be a princess or a queen, right? Mary was always, she may call herself a queen or a princess, but Mary was always, you always knew she was that, that woman that you knew, like it was relatable. So anyway, it was great fun doing that. I also had no access to her either. I'm the king of no access. So
yeah.
But I knew I had things to say even if she wouldn't talk to me. So I did talk to a lot of people she worked with over the years. So
anyone was to write a biography about you somehow, some way.
Making a way of no way. Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
No, I wouldn't worry about too much about the fan base of Mary J. Blige. If anything, I'd worry about if this were to get out, the fandom of Husker Du, who are a few.
Oh, I'm terrified. I know those people. Yeah,
army. They're
yeah. No, I know.
Yeah,
like
I know.
XTC was another band I never understood, and now I've got them on my neck too. The XTC. You remember that?
Oh my God! What if God? So that. You didn't bring these people down on me. We gotta stop.
And one of our friends, as one of our good friends will say, it just goes over my head. That's all. I'm sure it just goes over my head. So
yeah. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure we're the ignorant ones. All right. So all this writing of books, you're also, you've written, at the time you're writing a lot of articles. You keep referencing, I was working on an article, it expanded. So you actually wrote for over 2 decades for Rock Rap Confidential. Can you tell our audience a little bit about Rock Rap Confidential, what that was, and then who put that together?
Yeah, well, that started with, we have a mutual friend there, Lee Ballinger, who introduced us, I believe, if I'm right. Lee Ballinger. What's that?
OB.
Taskmaster General. Yeah. So we he and Dave Marsh, who Dave Marsh was like it's not an overstatement. He's my favorite writer when I was a teenager. I mean, like there was, I just people I turned to. I read a lot of the different writers in Rolling Stone, different publications, but Dave was the guy that just seemed to like, he kind of came and just like had this conversation with me on the edge of my bed or something. I really related to what he was saying. And often it was pretty heavy what he was saying. But they put together this newsletter and I didn't know about it because Dave had left Rolling Stone, and I tried to follow him around. He'd been at different publications, one called The Record, one called Musician. But they put out this newsletter for some years before I reconnected, called Rock and Roll Confidential. Originally, it changed to Rock and Rap. But the concept of the newsletter, which was 8 typed pages, right? Was I guess we call it a zine now, or I don't know what we call it now, but the concept was that there's a lot, we have all this energy, and I certainly did. Music breeds this political. There's a call there, and there's this political. All art has that. There's a call, and you want to respond. And my first response is I wanted to be a musician for several years till I realized I wasn't very good. But it was a rock and politics newsletter based around the idea that we could take this energy and connect the music up with the people the music was talking about around different social issues, political issues. You could make, I think that's what made Dave always stand out as a writer at Rolling Stone or anywhere he was writing. Cream was where he started, was that you always had a sense that he knew it was bigger than just the musicians. We weren't just musicians and fans. We were all kind of part of something, some kind of a cultural revolution. And there were things that could be done with that cultural revolution. And I think Rock and Rap Confidential, it was like one issue after another, dealing with issues facing musicians, dealing with issues facing fans, but trying to get us to unite around the fact that we could actually do something if we could figure out ways to work together. you know, and I met a lot of the people that I work with still today through working with Rock and Rap Confidential. You know.
So tell us a little bit about this David Marsh individual. His name is in many
David Marsh, yeah.
Many times. Tell us about David Marsh.
Well, Dave Marsh is unfortunately he's not the household name that I wish he were. He was kind of when I was a kid, and he's hugely influential. But the world he wrote a book. He wrote for Rolling Stone. He had a column called American Grandstand. He was at Cream magazine first. And he really put the emphasis. He was there at the beginning of Cream magazine with Lester Bangs, who's the one everybody remembers now. I think, you know, like Lester Bangs is sort of the legendary rock critic. But Dave was always really focused on soul, and he was always really focused on other kinds of music that maybe didn't get the same attention that the hipsters, maybe focused on. And you couldn't read Dave Marsh without figuring out that the music was telling you to go do something, that like you could do something with this energy you were feeling in the music. And so he and Lee, so Dave became really, really much more famous in a general sort of way when he wrote the first biography of Bruce Springsteen, which was called Born to Run. And this was funny because Bruce was definitely like a cult act at that time. He was popular on the East Coast by some kind of weird fluke. He'd been on the cover of Newsweek and Time back in '75 with Born to Run. But he'd sort of gone away for a while. And I thought of Darkness on the Edge of Town, the first record I listened to much, was I thought it was kind of a punk record. It was part of that whole punk thing I was going through. And but he took this book and he turned it into this book, Born to Run, was a little history of rock and roll, with this real strong call that I'm not alone in. Like, I know a lot of people who read that book, and it just sort of changed the way we saw ourselves and our relationship to music and what we were going to do. And then he did a whole string of them. I mean, I don't know. Dave has something like 40 books under his name at this point. Dave loved music. I think he always did everything in service to music, but he also came up in Detroit in the height of, like, in '67. He's kind of was there to see everything with the Detroit riots and he had some experience writing for a radical paper there called the Fifth Estate. And he always saw the personal, the political, and the aesthetic is all tied up together, and you got to talk about it all, So that was what he carried forward. And there wasn't really anybody else like that. All these years, I've never known anybody quite like that.
Yeah. So, it's very interesting.
Some of the people we worked with. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're kind of interested in this little detour. I want to stay with Marsh. But a little detour here, just my own personal observation. Bruce Springsteen's often given credit for being this, like, very proletarian bard of, the country as a whole, but specifically New Jersey. And Bon Jovi's often shit on. But the reality is, this is a real thing.
I know this. I know.
Bon Jovi says, we're halfway there. Oh, we're living on a prayer. He's talking about people working at the docks. He's talking about struggle. And, and he loves these people. Meanwhile, Bruce Springsteen's getting all this credit, and he's talking about this is a town full of losers. And I'm pulling out of here to win. Yeah. I mean, I have a very libertarian kind of sentiment there. Man going around calling himself the boss has a big. I'm kidding. I love Bruce. I'm joking. But people shouldn't shit on Bon. I mean, I don't like Bon Jovi, but people shouldn't shit on Bon Jovi's commitment to the people of New Jersey. I think that's.
I promise. I'll say nothing bad about John Bon Jovi. There's a Springsteen has a rabid following, and it's an intense connection. Some of us had almost like, it's almost like we went down to the tent and we got saved or something by one of those records. But I don't apologize for him. I don't waste my breath apologizing for it. I think maybe I did it one time. I don't worry much about that anymore. He's fine. He's doing fine, and he still makes interesting music. But I don't feel like I actually try not to talk to him about him too much. It was an important part of me formatively, and it mattered for it still matters, but it's different. It's just like Dylan matters to some people the same way, or Van Morrison or whoever.
Yeah, no, he definitely accomplished something, and he definitely was a man about his craft. I'm just saying, like this guy said, it's a town full of losers, and I'm pulling out of here to win.
Oh, that's right. Well, sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff is about the American. A lot of this stuff is about believing in it and then being shit on. Which is.
When Bruce Springsteen tells you who he is, believe him.
I'll say, okay, I will defend him a little here. Here's the thing. Here's the thing he did for me.
Yeah.
Along with Dave, they both did this, and it's a chicken and egg sort of thing. But he was always pointing me. In fact, there's an interview with a musician that I always think of. He was always pointing me outward toward other music. Mm-hmm. So I started like listening to things I wouldn't normally listen to. Like being from Oklahoma, the last thing I wanted to listen to was country. Even though my dad liked country, and I listened to a little, but I felt alienated from it. I think a lot of people feel alienated by where they're from. And, he took me back, with the river and some of the things he said about it. I went back and I started listening to a lot of soul. I started listening to a lot of country, a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have listened to otherwise because of him. And women. That's the interesting thing about Bruce is Born to Run's like a girl group record with guitar. It is. It's like Darling Love. It's that's what it sounds like.
It sounds like Spector, kind of like the Ronettes or something. Yeah, you're right.
And he covered stuff like that all the time. So Then She Kissed Me and all these things. Yeah. So he opened a lot of doors for me in terms of listening. It always bothered me though, and this is that creepy thing about fame. It always bothered me, still bothers me, that there's such an intense sort of attraction to him by his fan base, even though usually they're pissed at him about something. But there's this intense attraction that it feels like it doesn't broaden the way it should. It doesn't go outward. It sort of implodes in some ways. And I feel like, to his credit, I feel like I've seen him wrestle with that for 40 years. Try to figure out ways around it.
Yeah, but I mean, like, no matter how politicized you are, you still see that happen. You see it happen with Rage Against the Machine. You see it happen with, other groups that, whatever. People showing up to the show, and then they go out, and then they do what they do.
It's systemic. Yeah. And, and of course he worked with Tom because, he was trying to connect across different boundaries, and, he's always doing that. So,
yeah. So enough about these open doors. Let's talk about somebody who tried to close the door on everyone, right? Tipper Gore. Now you were smooth transition. So you with Dave Marsh and Lee were writing all kinds of articles at the time when they were trying to censor music and slap labels and make it like impossible for certain groups to sell their records. So can you tell us a little bit about that time period just in general, and then after that your involvement within it?
Well, there were a few years before I even came on board there where the newsletter, I think really the height of the newsletter was just, in some ways, was that era right before, but where so much was sort of politically, it was the era of the charity record, right? The sort of the We Are the Worlds and all those things. But what was happening, was all these people were sort of asserting like, well, what can we do with music in a different way? Which for me, the culmination, the very first thing I wrote about was Sun City, which was, the artist boycott of South Africa in 1986, right? Which, about Tipper. So when I come in, this war is off and running, right? I mean, the first article I wrote was that same year as like the Senate hearings. I mean, Al Gore held Senate hearings on the evils of rock music, but they tended to focus on heavy metal and rap, especially, and heavy metal in the sense, in a lot of ways, of the mainstream stuff. It's like Twisted Sister and whatever. But and a lot of people didn't take it very seriously. But what they did, they actually succeeded at what they were trying to do, which is they created. Well, they got records labeled for starters, which changed how records were distributed in some ways, and really, I think, kind of minimized free speech in some ways after that. Yeah, there was an all out, and you have to wonder when you see this happening. You see a bipartisan commission form to investigate something, right? And they were investigating, rap and rock lyrics, right? And saying they were, causing kids to commit suicide and be depraved and become gangsters and become, whatever. Those hearings were, Tipper and the Washington Housewives that formed the PMRC. They're both Republicans and Democrats. Were I believe the very first one. What was her name? Susan Baker. I think Susan Baker. Was at a workout class. She was at her spin or something, whatever they did back then. Yeah. And she heard Darling Nikki, and she was so freaked out. No, it's another woman. It's not Susan Baker, but it doesn't matter. She heard Darling Nikki, and Darling Nikki, right? Off Purple. Yeah. Okay. It's mostly a masturbation song as much as anything. But anyway, she got so freaked out that she used that as an excuse, at least, to write like a Newsweek editorial, and this organization formed. But it was pretty clear what was going on was we have to kind of step on these musicians because they're making a lot of statements right now, and they were. In some ways, I think that era was more political than the '60s in terms of overtly artists making statements of various kinds, and the most dramatic, I think, was that that boycott, that artist boycott of South Africa with Sun City Records. So absolutely. But anyway, I actually wrote. There's a series that schools use all the time called Opposing Viewpoints, and I was solicited by a professor who worked on that, who lived here in town. He said, "We've got this article about why records should be labeled, and we need someone to write a counter argument to that." And so I wrote the counter argument to Tipper Gore's. This is out there somewhere. In this book of Opposing Viewpoints, there's Tipper saying why records should be labeled, and I wrote the counterpoint why we shouldn't label records.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that's I don't know. You mentioned something about music being politicized, and I think that the '80s are often thought of times of this great bombast, music that's just very whatever. And I think that people think of when they think of hip hop, certainly think of very political, early hip hop.
Sure.
And obviously Public Enemy and later NWA, definitely making these really strong statements. But generally speaking, the '80s outside of hip hop thought of as kind of the celebration of bombast. But when I think back about some of the songs from the '80s, and these are not even songs I particularly like or think about, I just know that they existed and were big hits, right? Born in the USA is about a Vietnam vet who can't get a job. That Fast Car by Tracy Chapman about leaving a potentially kind of abusive relationship of being very working class. The Way It Is by I actually like Springsteen. I like Tracy Chapman. I don't like Bruce Hornsby at all, but The Way It Is is very, very working class, and a song about people struggling to work and about the color line. I mean, these are really politicized songs,
and really about being stuck in a certain mindset. Yeah. I mean, that's
but there's a lot of elevator music,
Yeah. Well, people were just discovering synthesizers. They were fun, and it's also a big divide, right? It's oh, that's not real music anymore, which RC took all these beautiful stands on things like that, there was this outright rejection of synthesizers, outright rejection of sampling, all these things that happened. And RC was there, Rock and Rap Confidential was there always to defend to talk to, George Clinton about what he thought of sampling. He thought it was great, even though he's one of the most sampled artists, it's like, but anyway, yeah, there was a lot going on. And there's also a sense that gets, I'm not saying it's dead, but in the mainstream, it gets attacked and sort of, it loses a lot of its power over the next couple of decades, where it really starts feeling like, wow, they've figured out a way to reduce the mainstream of pop to just pure show business. But there was a moment there where it didn't feel like that. It felt like these things were getting through. Do you know what I mean? There was, like you said, there were songs that were getting through that seemed, hell, one of my favorites was a R&B song by a girl named Tracy Spencer, and she was a girl. She's like 14 or something. But she had this song, This House is Our House. Let's give it to the people. It was beautiful.
Wow.
Song. Yeah, look it up. It's good. It holds up too. It holds up after all these years. I'm not sure what her whole story is. I should have done her book, maybe.
Yeah. I was talking to her about it.
She had a good record. Imagine was on that record too. A cover. Yeah, that's a good record.
Cover of Imagine?
Yeah. But I don't think she went around very long. I don't know. She probably grew up and had a real life of some kind or something.
Yeah. Unlike you or I. So Danny, what do you want to be when you grow up? What's the next chapter of Danny Alexander looking like?
Oh, well, I work a lot with the People's Tribune, which covers like frontline struggles all over the country, and I'm on the editorial board of a paper called Rally Comrades that talks a lot about the conditions, the situation where we are right now. So I focus on these things day in, day out. It's been really busy with this coronavirus. We have this moment that has all this revolutionary potential, and we can see it like being killed across the board as fast as people are thinking of ways to get people to think. You have like 100 options. Let's just think in terms of 2, like Biden, Trump or something, whatever. But, if there was ever a moment where we thought, if somebody's hungry, we should get food to them. If they need medical help, we should get them medical help. Like that shouldn't be, if they're dealing with a disease, they should be, they should have the things they need to deal with the disease and not die for the cause. But anyway, I write all the time. I'm a very confused writer. Once in a while, I even go into poetry. But you guys, you're all so much better than me. I'm working on a memoir about an old friend that took her life 10 years ago this year. Her name was Erica Gardner, and she was somebody I identified with, even politically, like very intensely, but where I could find hope, she only could find despair, right? And she lived a big life. I'm still friends with a lot of her friends, and it's like we all she left a mark on us. And I think there's a lot of people like this. There's a lot of musicians like this who seem to almost teach the rest of us how to live, but then they can't keep themselves going. She took her life. So I find myself thinking about her a lot and I'm still arguing with her. So I thought, why don't you put that down on paper? So
at this point in time, we talk about, essential workers, all these people being, they're still out there working. And, everyone wants to, say they're heroic, but no one wants to actually give them a raise or even a living wage in many cases. We see it's disproportionately Black and Latino people who are out there whose lives are at risk. We see all kinds of horrible things at this time. What I want to ask you now is, but I want to ask you a broader question. I've been posing it to a lot of people. And the answer is relatively obvious, but it's always interesting to me how, for posterity, how people answer this question a little differently from each other. So why is it that a market system will fail to provide the necessities for people in a time of a health crisis, a health pandemic?
Why is it a market system?
Why is it a market system will consistently fail to provide what people need in a pandemic?
Because people want to make money, and that doesn't have anything to do with getting people what they need. You know, I mean, what did we do? You know, apparently, from what we can tell now, I'm not sure they didn't know what was going on in December, but they definitely knew what was going on in January. And what was the? I'm saying people in power in our own country. The WHO by January 15th was saying this was a world health crisis. Had a protocol we could have taken and used to start testing everybody in the country and figure out where it was and try to isolate and locate the disease. But what did we do? We started working on private-public partnerships so people can make money off this deal. And unfortunately, I think we have a system that's built to let us down. It's people are making big money off this right now, and the rest of us are trying to figure out how to pay April's rent as May 1st approaches. Right? It's I may not be answering that question as well, but I think it's a competitive system based on who wins. And right now, what we need is a cooperative system based on, and I think from here on out, because there aren't jobs for everybody, that'll pay. I think we need to start thinking about a cooperative system where we make sure people have the things they need just because they need them. I have a friend here in town who said he thinks one of the most obscene phrases in the English language is earning a living. Like that you have to earn a living, right? You aren't just granted that by being here. You might need to, earn a reason for anyone to pay attention to you, but a living, it's I had this revelation working with students, and I don't know if it's true. Sometimes I don't care if it's true, if it works for me. But that it.
I mean, like you do what you want.
Well, Maslow's hierarchy. Maslow's hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
I've been hearing that all through school, and in my mind, the concept of Maslow's hierarchy was. For years was just like, oh, well, that seems kind of like BS because it's saying if you don't have these things taken care of, then you can't think about these other things, right? If you don't have shelter or whatever, then you can't be thinking about, bigger issues and fulfillment and all these things. And yet I know people like Sherry Honkel and the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, people are out there, they don't have shelter, and yet they're like taking care of each other and they're making history. And then I ran across it in terms of dealing with an issue in class, and I realized, damn, I think he wrote that to say if we took care of all these base needs, we'd still have like 4 levels of motivation. If we all had shelter, food, everything we needed to be secure, we'd still have lots of reasons we're motivated, and we all know that's true. We're motivated because we're alive. 4-year-olds could teach us a lot about motivation, man. Once you start going to school, school kills motivation, right? But up until you start going to school, I think people are there. Everyone's motivated to do anything and everything, right? And so I don't even remember what the question was anymore. I just know that the going back to your original question, the system is not made for the vast majority of us out here as individuals, and particularly people who've been on the bottom of society, to even have a chance. I mean, you got to have a few that kind of make people feel like they have a chance, but
Yeah.
I think everybody should have everything they need, and I don't think there's any reason why they can't. So
why is it that China can build a hospital in 10 days and the president of the United States is talking about drinking bleach?
Well, I think that goes back to what can he profit off making his hospital in 10 days? Does he want to take care of people that bad? or does he just want, does he just want to? Unfortunately, I think it's even more insidious than that now. Now we've got two parties negotiating different forms of fascism, right? Like I mean, Trump hurling us toward it, right? I mean, like, let's just go there, right? Some people will, you can just go ahead. You're older, you can just die for this, or try drinking some Lysol or whatever, bleach. But I think he's got a situation where he's way in over his head, and it really just comes down to, like, can he make money off of it? And if he can't make money off of it, he doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
But I think he's being used by the most fascist elements in our, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't want to give him too much credit. I think he's being used by the most fascist elements in our society, of a certain kind of fascism, right-wing fascism, that in order to sort of hurry us along toward us. I mean, we have a system now that doesn't provide for. I mean, it doesn't offer jobs to everybody. It's very automated. I mean, you notice, give or take toilet paper, we still have shelves that are full of most of the things we need, right? And even though nobody hardly can work, and there isn't a need for most of the workforce out here anymore. Not really. Except that we need somebody to buy the goods. We've been in that crisis for years now, but this just makes it so naked and so apparent, Yeah. I don't know. What am I leaving out, man?
Well, let's have another question similar. Why is it that Cuba has more doctors per capita than anywhere in the world, despite the fact that there's not this profit incentive? I'm always hear about here in the United States. There's no profit. Why would anyone become a doctor in Cuba? Cab drivers make more, and yet Cuba has more doctors per capita than anywhere in the world. And yet, when a hurricane hits Cuba, they're able to clear people out, whereas we see in the United States, people are left to drown. So why is it that Cuba is run that way, and in the United States of America, the president is suggesting that we drink bleach?
Well, our healthcare, I was talking to a doctor and a nurse earlier today, who both of them said our healthcare system is immoral. Mm-hmm. The healthcare system they work in. And I could say that about the educational system I work in. There's a lot of things about it that are immoral, but if you want to turn a profit off of people's healthcare, then you're making choices, life and death decisions based on making money. I think Cuba has managed to be this holdout against, this ridiculous superpower of ours that's in decline, I think, now, but because the Cuban government, for whatever faults people may see with it, it's always recognized you have to take care of the people, and they weather hurricanes without half the problems we have here on the mainland. Healthcare is just a human right down there. I just think it's a matter of values, and frankly, America's values are in terrible shape right now. As formally, the very fact that we can go through something we're going through right now, and people don't immediately say, no one should be going hungry, nobody should be worrying about the rent, nobody should be worrying about getting tested or getting health care. I mean, you would think, if we had these Judeo-Christian moral values that supposedly cement the society, we would immediately agree. That's right. That's what a federal government should be for, But that's not what our government's for. I think our government's for protecting wealth and maintaining the status quo and being an empire, making sure that we don't lose control of the globe from the to the Chinese or something, or whatever this ongoing conflict with Russia and the Black Sea or whatever is at this point. But we something really drove that home to me not long ago. Just the fact that we look at the whole world as I mean, you know it, but it was so vivid in one of these events that came up. It's like we look at the whole world as something we have to strategically control.
Right. I think that we make a mistake sometimes, but we don't really realize that the United States of America has the most expensive military in the world, but the largest military in the world is China, and the most powerful nuclear arsenal is Russia. So, the United States of America is an extremely powerful nation. It's an extremely violent nation, the most violent nation, the biggest bully in the world. But they could find
Most
themselves
people in prison, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I say they could find ourselves, I mean we would obviously die as well. But we could all find ourselves in a situation of fuck around and find out should they pursue this course of war with either Russia and China or potentially both. I mean, I think this is really a terrifying, terrifying possibility. But I don't want to end on a note of nuclear terror. Danny, what advice do you have to young writers who are interested in music?
Who are interested in music?
Yeah, I want to write about music as you have done.
Oh, Lord, well, use it as inspiration. I mean, I think I love writing about music, and I think there is a role for people to write about music. I unfortunately think there's very, very low market for that. I mean, I was warned about that when I was, when I first met Dave. He was like, well, there's really no place to write, and there's no career opportunities there. And that was 30 years ago. And that's not entirely true, but I mean, if you really love music, I think you should think about new and creative ways to respond to that music and say the things that music makes you want to say, right? And if that means you use music as the vehicle for it, great. If that means you title your novel after a song, great, whatever. But I'm not sure. I mean, you want to think of new ways of doing it, because at this point, the world of music writing has basically come down to either something that's very academic in a lot of ways, and there's some great people who do wonderful work there, and there's some important history there. And if you want to be a historian of music, that's fantastic and important. But I think music inspires us to do a lot of different kinds of things, and I think you just have to recognize that the world of overtly like writing about music that I sort of found myself in, which never really provided me a paid career. I think there was 1 year back there where I was, I almost could quit teaching, but that's 2 decades ago. But I would say, it's mostly either if you want to write as a consumer guide, great. If you want to write history, great. But if you want to do other things with music writing, don't feel like think about using it to do whatever you want to do, and connecting with that music and that audience is one way to build your own audience, right? So it just feels like there's a wide world of possibilities, and that music criticism proper has sort of run its course in terms of what it used to do. There was a movement quality when I first started reading about it. It felt like, and I think that was true up through the 80s, the hip hop writers and the Source and all these things that were going on. They felt like you were part of a movement, complex, difficult movement, but it was there. But I'm not sure. And if there was a new musical movement in writing that cropped up, I would be all for it. But I think it's really about, I don't mean to talk so long, but I feel like for me, writing about music was because music called me to do something. Music inspired me. I would encourage people at this point in our history, do whatever you want to do, but let it inspire you to do what you really want to do,
Yeah.
So
you heard from Danny's there. Say what you want to say, but make sure it's original and it's wonderful and inspiring. Otherwise, do not wait.
Well, honestly,
I'm joking.
There's some truth to that, right?
Remix.
I've been a comp teacher way longer than anybody should ever be a comp teacher, right? I love them. I love the job.
Yeah.
So I have too many students. I mean, like all the writing organizations say you should not have like half as many students as I have. But you know, I'm always telling them, you know, if you're not inspired by what you're doing, then it's not going to be inspiring to somebody else, right? You know, you feel that when you write a poem, right? Like it's got to like light you up for you to know it's going to light other people up.
When I'm writing, I try to. I mean, there's certain things I need to. Yeah, the answer is yes, but I mean, the answer is much longer. I mean, the answer is yes, and then I can tell you like how I go about it. I mean, like to me, that's like anyone that says something like, you know, well, I just write for myself. I walk away because I'm not going to have this conversation with you because this conversation is probably just going to be for yourself too, and I don't have time for that. You know, so like you're not even interested in engaging me. Why am I sit here and watch you talk to yourself? I'm out of here. So I really, yes, the answer is yeah. For me, like I feel like really great writing. If you write incredibly well, let's say like you wrote about like let's say the death of your grandparents, right? Yeah. If you write it well, I'm not even thinking about your grandparents or the city you said in. I'm thinking about my own, right? Or yeah. Maybe listening to the facts you're telling me, but the feelings that are washing over me are going to wash over the death of my own grandparents, right? I'm going to think about that. I'm going to feel that. And that's you writing really well, is to make me feel about a similar experience I've had to the thing you're talking about. So I don't think that good writing is like, I need the world to hear my story. And my story is so important. And then there's narcissism. And I think that we really, we encourage that. I think we encourage narcissism way too much, but
yeah, it's tricky.
These are career-ending statements. So this is about you. This is about
You made me think of one of my favorite things. I know we're probably out of time, but you made me think. One of my favorite things Dave Marsh ever said about his own writing was that it was, you know, I think he said, I just figured out a way to say what people were thinking anyway, you know, in a way, or like to sort of open themselves up to what they were actually thinking, right? You know, and I think that's what you're saying is another version of that in my mind, you know, like helping us articulate our own souls, our own, you know, what's going on within us, whatever it is. You made me think of how when a string's in tune, the string, when you're tuning strings, like when you get one in tune, the next one vibrates, like the one next to it, like let's say you go through and tune your instrument as you get the right note on this string to vibrate off the next one. And I think what you described made me think of that. Like you get the thing about your grandparents right, and mine are vibrating in me, right? You know, my history is vibrating in me. It's a wonderful, you know, that's the kind of magic I believe in, this stuff that we create and that inspires each other to keep going. You know, I don't have many articles of faith, but one is in people and creativity.
Yeah.
You know,
so here's from Daniel Snyder, don't stop believing. All right.
You're fantastic, Matt. This is inspiring to me, and thank you so much. I mean, I'm honored. I've seen who you have on here. Like, I don't even know how I got in through the gate, but thank you so much for talking with me. I appreciate it.
Okay.